The Japanese had entered the war due to their remaining alliance with Britain. This way they could
be a little less scared of Russia.
The Russo-Japanese War, and this battle, the Siege of Qingchao, was one of the few notable Japanese operations during the war. The start of the war had given Japan a rare opportunity to take the German outposts in the seas around Japan with little to no repercussions from other nations. In fact, they were almost encouraged by Britain in order to weaken the German home front due to the reduction of incoming resources. The Japanese military officials wanted to undergo this operation due to their decision that
Japan should take the islands
in order to wrestle more control over the Pacific and eventually China, as they had already expanded in controlling Korea. Grabbing this port of Qingchao would give them strategic advantages, especially to invade into China and eventually control the seas around Japan with an iron grip. However, at the port of Qingchao, the Japanese had one major obstacle in taking the stronghold of German power in the Far East: the major fortifications the Germans had installed during the times of the Boxer Rebellion within China. The Boxer Rebellion took place when the Chinese population rose up against the imperialistic nations that were carving out their country between each other. Due to these fortifications, attempting to land without the best of opportunities would leave countless lives lost, and possibly jeopardize the entire Japanese attack. They, however, came up with a solution for this problem: to simply starve out the German forces of supplies, because the outpost had relatively few soldiers and even fewer supplies, most of which they had gathered from the mainland of Germany. Because what the Germans had in fortifications, they lacked in reinforcements, trained men, food, and ammunition. And so the Japanese blocked the Germans in and drained them out of resources over a 7-week siege. As the Germans ran out of resources, the Japanese prepared for an attack, preparing with 23,000 Japanese infantry, 150 artillery pieces, and 10 naval units, most of which had been blockading the port for those 7 weeks. The English also sent 1,500 infantry, which they used to mostly oversee the Japanese forces. This overwhelming force would cause the Japanese to outnumber the Germans 6-1 on land, and in the sea 2-1. The Germans had 1 aircraft, and it is unknown how many aircraft the Japanese had, presumably 0, however. As this was happening, the Germans knew what was to come, so they began to reinforce their already steadfast fortifications. Once the attack began, both sides knew what the outcome would be. Yet the German forces held out for as long as they could, because, as one soldier put it, "Unfortunately, we cannot do more. We know that the Kaiser and the fatherland will look upon us with pride, and now I lie down to rest, perhaps for the last time." By the end of the siege and battle, 199 Germans had died, 504 had been wounded, and 3,400 captured, whereas in the attacking Allied forces, 236 to 727, sources disagree, of Japanese soldiers had died, 1,300 were wounded, and 12 English infantry were killed, of which most of the Allied losses were from a ship being hit by a mine in the sea, leading to its sinking. Even after the port fell, the Germans called it a heroic and unforgettable event in German history, that they must get payback against the Japanese once the war on the mainland was resolved. The Japanese, however, saw it as another major victory, paving their way into the global stage, showing their power as a nation, and growing it with the newfound control of this territory. This is one of the few operations in the war which involved majoritively Japanese troops. And so finally the battle began on the 31st of October 1914. This is fairly early in the war. This battle, although much smaller in comparison with more notable World War I battles, still embodies some of the early characteristics of total war. For one, the nations of Germany and Japan were fighting from somewhat large distances. These two would not usually be in conflict. To add on to that, it was nations fighting, not the rulers or the people. Japanese soldiers were the only ones fighting because of their nation's alliance with Britain. Lastly, there were 3 mediums of battle: the surface of water, the air, and the land. These 3 mediums were combined for maximum effectiveness by the Japanese offensive. Rear Admiral Schlieper, one of the German leaders in the battle, wrote this one day after the Germans lost control of Qingdao. "But one thing more I should like to attest to. Of a truth, ye heroes, ye dead, ye mortally wounded ones, and ye survivors, ye did your duty to the last." The nationalism of this man is evident through his use of the term duty when referencing soldiers who died in battle. This goes further to show the motivation of many of the men who died very early on in the war.